Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
Today's warehouse needs to keep inventory moving smoothly and quickly. Meet these challenges with on-demand warehouse labeling from Brother Mobile Solutions. Our mobile and industrial printers will help optimize your operations to achieve the speed, reliability, and durability your warehouse needs. With easy integration for existing warehouse technology, convenient portability, and upfront affordability, Brother Mobile Solutions is at your side when it comes to warehouse labeling. Try one for free today by visiting brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse or click the link in the show notes. That's brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse to try one for free today.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. On today's episode, I am joined by the president and founder of Portable Intelligence, Jeff Lem. Also the author of Your Warehouse is Not Your Fridge, now in its second edition, which I just got at ProMat, so we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But we're going to talk a little bit about portable intelligence, kind of what the next generation of warehouse management systems are, the WMS, and also smart warehouse solutions that Portable Intelligence is coming out with as well, and what that kind of means and how does that break down into our current state, but also into the future as well, as we tend to get these smarter warehouses and start to bring in these new solutions like AI and RTLS and different things like that. So Jeff's going to tell us all about that and give us a little update on Portable Intelligence and his book as well. So Jeff, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm doing good, Kevin, and thank you again for having me. It's always a lot of fun being on your show.
Definitely happy to have you back on, and it's been a little while since you came on the show, and I'm curious, why don't you give us kind of a brief overview of Portable Intelligence for maybe the people that are not familiar?
Sure, and thank you again. So Portable Intelligence was founded on the basic premise of really taking WMS space to the next level, and in that regard, we've created what I consider to be the Smart Warehouse Platform, which is comprising of several key technologies, two of them being artificial intelligence and real-time locating systems, or very simply indoor tracking. So on that foundation, we've been adding that to our existing WMS solution and really pushing out what I consider to be the boundaries of what a typical WMS is considered. So we're promoting a WMS is not your grandfather's system that they've been using, 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, I like that. And it's not your grandfather's WMS. That's pretty good. So, I mean, definitely, obviously pushing the boundaries on what a typical WMS is. I think that's an interesting statement there. I mean, as we start to build out systems and change the way that systems look overall, sometimes they end up forming into new types of systems potentially. So I'm curious, within the bounds of a WMS, however we want to maybe define that. I mean, when you say you're kind of pushing the WMS to something different and in a different way, I mean, what does that really mean to you, and how do you think the shape or the definition of a WMS is kind of expanding or changing over time?
Yeah, and I mean, when I got into this industry like 30 years ago, and I was shocked to see how much stuff is done manually, right? And even though we've since deployed barcoding and Wi-Fi and wireless technologies, a lot of the processes are still very, what I consider to be manual and require a lot of what I call tribal knowledge. So, it's all in people's heads, how to do a particular pick task, how to do a put away, how to do, certain types of functions in the warehouse. So it's highly dependent upon well-trained, tenured staff. And at the same time, there's very little accountability. When you compare, a typical warehouse to that of a manufacturer who makes, a vehicle or even a pen or whatever, they know down to the penny, and as well as to the second, how much time and how much cost it took to make that particular product. Whereas you take a look at your typical warehouse movement, say move product from A to B, we have no idea how long it took, how much distance they traveled to do it, what is a typical standard for that. So in many ways, it's like a Wild West where guys get to decide, what tasks they want to do and how they want to do it. And as you know, there's little accountability. And as a result, warehouses are run basically on rules of thumb. How many lines can we pick to an hour? How many orders can we process a day? And that's basically how warehouses are run today, even with, the automation that we've seen today, at least with the barcoding and wireless that have been put in place in the last few years. So, fast forward to what we're doing on the smart warehouse side is that we're creating a new frontier in the sense that we're getting down to the individual tasks themselves, holding the workers accountable to what they're doing, and also timing and the distribution of those tasks to the workers based on the priorities of the warehouse. So, and that's where, in a very simple nutshell, what we're doing basically is creating a new type of way of managing and viewing your workforce, and also improving the efficiency at the same time.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that you touched on how, it's kind of evolved over time. And like you said, you've been involved in this space in 30 years. And, we look back and see, not even looking back, still we have people that are, doing things very manually and like you said, utilizing that tribal knowledge. And I think the big thing, like you said there, with no real accountability in a sense, right? That we're kind of just going off of what we know and what's been the way that we've done it, or working within those limits or constraints in a way without being able to push further, because we're stuck in that mindset of, it's worked for us, right? So why would we, try something different, or why would we disrupt it, right? And I think it's interesting because we look at everything that's coming into the market, and, you mentioned some of the automation and robotics, and even something as simple as barcoding as well, are huge step forwards in the advancement of efficiency and productivity, by harnessing those systems and being able to do that. So it's great that you guys are taking a look at that and bringing in some of these newer technologies to, as you're saying, create a smarter warehouse and a smarter WMS, I guess, in a sense too. So tell us a little bit about how, like, what that smart warehouse looks like. And I think your solution is called TED, right? So tell us a little bit about TED and who that is, what it is, I guess. Yeah.
Let's start where WMSs are today, and and it goes to the way a WMS is constructed and how it thinks. WMSs today, at least most of them, think along the lines of large data points. So think purchase orders, think work orders, think sales orders, right? So when on the inbound side, you're receiving against a purchase order, right? So you key in the purchase order number, then you key in the line number, and you start scanning away, right? Whereas same thing on a work order, that's in a manufacturing environment. Work orders typically drive the manufacturing environment. And then same thing on customer orders or sales orders, and that's what you pick a ship against. Now, how those tasks get done, it's up to the worker. So back to the purchase order example, when you receive a purchase order, you may have 5 lines in that purchase order. Workers can decide to go on line 1, line 5, line 3, whatever. Same thing on the sales orders side. You get a stack of orders to pick to a worker. He may cherry pick through the list of orders to decide what he wants to work on first. If he's close to a break, he may very much decide to do the one with the fewest lines, which may not be the one that the truck has shown up ready to take that order away. So there's a disconnect. Fast forward to AMRs, automated mobile robots, or AGVs, automated guided vehicles. They don't think along those lines. You tell an AMR, go pick that work order, it doesn't know. AMRs, AGVs, they think in the line of routes, of tasks, location, right? So you got to be able to speak that language if you want to interface to them, right? And interfacing also means synchronizing to them. So basically, that's where SMART comes into play. SMART is going to fill that gap between the AMRs and your WMS by basically speaking the language of those pieces of automated equipment. Even if you don't get them, you need to understand, in order to properly control your warehouse, you need to get down to the task level. And that's always been the trick with the WMS, is that most WMSs aren't set up to track even start and stop times of various tasks. Like, for example, you start your pick task, you finish your pick task. There's really no real indication as to when you actually started it and when you actually finished it. And if you're using barcode scans, it's not always a reliable indicator of start and stop. And so getting down to the task level on the WMS side will allow us to basically interface and better control the whole environment, so that when you do bring in automation, and it will happen, it's also ultimately inevitable, you've got to be able to tie into that piece of equipment and speak their language, as I mentioned earlier. And so back to TED, which stands for Task Engine Distributor, basically it takes the tasks coming out of your WMS or out of your ERP to create the tasks and distribute them to what I call the most available driver. And we can have lots of definitions around what most available means, but it's basically creating a pool of workers who are most available and then assigning it to the appropriate worker. And that's where AI comes into place as well, because what AI will do is then give you a good estimation as to how long this task should take. And then secondly, who best to give this task to, right? Who really knocks this task out of the ballpark. And also, as well, provides all sorts of analytics so that you can continually refine your model and start holding all these workers accountable. I'm not saying warehouse workers are lazy. No, they're really hardworking guys. Yeah. It's just a question of how do we reduce the travel time, which, as you know, Kevin, makes up for as much as 50% of a warehouse worker's time. If you can reduce that by 25%, that's a huge gain right there.
Yeah.
So, and you can't do that unless you know where people are. So the second technology that TED uses, as well as RTLS, our real-time locating system. So with that awareness of where people are in the facility, we now have the final missing piece that allows us to properly allocate tasks and decide who's truly available to do a task. Like I said, if you have a half a million square foot warehouse and you give the task to Joe who's at the other end of the warehouse, he's not going to be able to do that. Or he could be taking a bathroom break or some sort of lunch break or whatever, and he or she won't be able to do that because they're just not physically available or in the right area.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a lot of pain points, certainly, that are there for, existing WMS or older WMS systems, and I certainly have felt a lot of them in my experience and in my career as well. I mean, talking about not having kind of that visibility into how long are certain tasks actually taking. I mean, it's on the surface, it may not seem like such a a big deal, but then when you start to, you know, pick apart your processes and you're trying to understand, well, how long is it actually taking somebody to, you know, do this? And, you know, your business changes over time, right? And you change layouts, you change the way your product is packaged. You know, maybe you have new product, it's heavier than some of the older product. It takes longer to lift and put on a pallet and pick and all these different things. And if you can't have that kind of granular visibility into those details of, you know, how long is each pick actually taking somebody, and, you know, what are those individual steps doing, then it's hard to quantify that. And I think it's hard to, and I've kind of had this debate in my previous roles as well with people where it's like, well, you know, how do we know that it's actually 21 lines an hour? I mean, it's, you know, like, how we can't tell like how long it's actually taking somebody to pick on average, because we don't have that detail level. Like, we just know at the end of the day they pick this many lines and they work this many hours. So I guess that's the average, right? But if you start to break it down and look at it and look at those different things, I think that goes such a long way to being able to, like you said, and make huge impacts in your efficiency and your productivity. You know, cutting that travel time by, you know, 25%. I mean, that's a huge gain, especially, you know, as we look at more fast-paced and higher volume situations where, you know, like e-commerce and all different types of things. I mean, it can make huge impact. So it's great that you guys are taking that approach and looking at it. And I think the one big thing that I'm hearing from you and seeing here is, you know, you kind of go back to that example where, you know, Joe gets a couple sales orders and, you know, the pick list, and like you said, like, he's gonna sort through and he's gonna pick one that's maybe he thinks is the easiest first, and, you know, work his way up to the hardest one or the longest one, because, you know, he had a late night last night, and, you know, he wants to ease into his day, right? Or something like that.
It's a Monday.
yeah, it's a Monday, right? And so we want to start off a little slow. So, but, you know, I think that thing, like you said, or even, you know, the employee that, you know, as you said, I mean, they're working hard, certainly, but even the employee who has the best intention and is thinking like, oh, I'll do the shorter one first because I can get it to the dock sooner. But then maybe that shorter one, well, it doesn't even have to ship technically until like tomorrow morning. But I got a bigger one that's got to get out the door by like 4:00 this afternoon, and now I'm starting that at 1:00 in the afternoon when I could have started at like 9 a.m. or something. And, you know, looking at those types of things and being able to give that priority and prioritization to the employee without them really having to think about it, or the AMR or AGV, I think can go a long way in improving those types of things. So tell us a little bit about, because you've deployed TED now, the Task Engine Distributor, and I like TED. I think it makes it definitely a friendly system, approachable, definitely.
Well, I use that little teddy bear for that movie TED, right?
I was thinking about that, actually. Yeah.
He's friendly.
Definitely. So you've deployed this now. You deployed TED now in one customer. So tell us a little bit about how that's going and how that's kind of changed their operation and the way that they do things.
Yeah, it was, you know, no, I'm not exaggerating, but the system went in very quickly. I mean, we've been selling WMSs and integrating WMSs into different ERPs for, you know, decades now. And this project was very straightforward, because basically all we had to do, I use the word quotes, all we had to do was monitor what was happening. In this case, they're a manufacturer with a warehouse, monitor what was happening on the factory floor. And that data is already there. So it's just now a question of what are the so-called task triggers associated with the various lines. In this case, they had over 30 production lines. And for each line, we created different criteria based on the capacity of each line by part, as to, you know, how many containers it can hold, both in raw materials and finished goods, right? And so what we would then do is just every minute monitor the status of these production lines. So that once a container got to a certain level of fullness, at least on the finished goods side, in this case, be it 40% or 50%, we would then create a task and then send it to the appropriate person who is assigned to that area. And they had a pool of workers assigned to a zone, which would cover so many work centers. In the past, they were assigning 1 or 2 drivers to a specific machine or work center, and now they're able to open it up. And they can flex in terms of defining how big their zones can be, whether it's 3 work centers or 5 work centers, it's up to them. And that would just create a larger pool of workers. So by pooling the workers, they now have more consistency in terms of service to it. We've eliminated also the need for drive-bys, guys driving by and going, how you doing, watching the status of the line. And that took up a large part of their day each day, and that added incredibly to the amount of miles they drove in a particular day. So by monitoring these tasks, once they're assigned to drivers, we would get the start and stop times as well as their distance traveled. And the stats we got coming out of it is pretty incredible. We've got some drivers doing as much as 200 tasks in a day, some doing 50 tasks in a day. And no surprise the guys doing more tasks drive less, right? But it doesn't necessarily reflect a better worker or a less capable worker. But what it does do is it leads to rather interesting or great conversations that now management could have to their workers. So I want to give you an example of that.
Yeah.
There is a function called put away, which is really just taking finished goods off the line and putting them away into a warehouse area. And the workers had us, through their lead worker, had us put in a function where we would stage 2 containers to a little location just beside the machines themselves. And when it got to 2 full containers, then for us to create the put away tasks, right? So in other words, they would take 2 containers away to do the put away, not 1, but 2. And for the simple reason is that they all felt it was more efficient. Management, have long had a view that is not necessarily the most efficient way of doing things. And the reason why is that when you pick up 2 containers stacked on top of each other with your forklifts, you're now driving it to the warehouse, and now you're looking for a spot that has space for 2 containers that will fit it. Right? And they're stacked on top of each other, so they're not necessarily going in the racking sometimes.
Yeah.
And even if they are going to racking, guess what? Racking only holds 1 container at a time, right? So now picture this. You got a forklift guy picking up 2 containers. He's now driving to the warehouse, and now he's got to find a slot that has exactly 2 spots for those containers. And the chances of that is like less than 50%. So what he invariably does is he puts the 2 down, takes one
off,
and now looks for one, and then takes the other one. So the question now before them is that, are they not more efficient just doing one at a time? And are they better off taking the 1 container as soon as it's full and taking it immediately to the warehouse and making it available for shipping? Because they work in a just-in-time environment with one of the large automotive parts manufacturers, holding back an extra container can be the difference between holding up that truck and getting it to the line over at the auto parts manufacturer. So needless to say, they've always had this ongoing conversation around what is more efficient. So now what they're able to do is says, do it my way for a week, do it your way for a week. Well, we already know you're doing it your way. And now we can actually compare as to how much more efficient you are in terms of doing it. So they're having a real proper conversation around, what is the best way to do it, and not opinionated or you take away, end up able to take away a lot of the emotion out of it and just discuss it at a proper level. And the exciting thing for them is they're now able to standardize across the board, because if you watch these guys work, and they've got, roughly 20 drivers, they all do things slightly different.
Right.
So based on how they were trained, everybody adapts their way of doing things in the warehouse according to the way they prefer. Right, which may not be necessarily best practices. So that's just an example of us being able to get into the weeds with respect to managing those tasks, as well as being able to drive great analytics around how many tasks they're doing, the average time, and the distance they're traveling as well. So from a OEE perspective, or operating equipment efficiency level, we're really able to add to that whole analysis there. So it's certainly made for some interesting conversations, and it's oddly enough, TED gets very addictive. Once we put in the system, we now give them a heat map as well as a real-time map of where everybody is in the facility. So you get an idea as to, are they all congregating around, Steve, because it's going to be bowling night tomorrow night, and they're all talking about which lanes they're getting and what the tees are, or it's NBA playoffs, so they will talk about last night's game or whatever, right? But they get to see that happening in real time because they look out the window and then they look at the map, and the two are the same. And for them, for the manager and supervisors, that's very empowering because now they know, where guys are. And now they know that they should be able to do specific tasks, etc. And from a safety perspective as well, we now have a history that if there is an accident in a certain area, they can always do what we call playback and review as to all the traffic that occurred in that area where the accident may have happened, where the accident happened, basically. So, and the interesting thing about it is that since we put in the system, they went live with it in February. There's been no shortage of ideas coming from them, and we just got one this morning that we're working with them today on being able to. Now they want to manually create tasks. As opposed to us automatically creating tasks, they want to be able to add tasks on their own, which is a fundamental basic feature in WMS systems. But now they want to be able to assign it to a driver or assign it to a person and then track when and how they did that particular task. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, and I could see that being useful, especially, I think about when we would do like special projects or something in the warehouse, and we'd want to like assign somebody to that for the day, like whether we're moving some racking around or moving the location of certain products or something like that. I think it's really great that you can have that potential flexibility as well. But I think the really big takeaway for me is when you talk about finding the true efficiency, whether it's 2 bins or 1 bin that they're moving at the same time. Like, what is, we can finally like end this debate. It sounds like they've been having for a long time. And I think what's really interesting about what you talked about there is the fact that you pointed out that, like, well, in the eyes of the driver, right, taking 2 bins at the same time may be potentially more efficient for them, but then isn't more efficient for the business overall. Are we holding up a truck to get out the door because we don't have that 1 bin put away yet or made available into a picking location, whatever the setup is there? And I think being able to now have that visibility into that overall timing of how things are lining up and how long the individual tasks are taking, but then also holding up or impacting the time a now connected task to that I think is such a great thing. And like, you said TED is addictive. I mean, I could just see myself in there going crazy, like, oh, we could improve this, we could improve this, we could do this, we could do this. I mean, once you have that visibility and you're able to really see that, you're able to figure out, okay, like, this is where we need to focus on, and this is where we could improve, and oh wow, we've been doing this, and we could do it like so much better in this way once you have that data around it and the visualization as well. So very, very interesting stuff. I'm curious on the safety aspect you touched on there. So you're able to do that kind of the playback, as you said, like see, where was the traffic with the RTLS, but I mean, does it also take into consideration, along with the prioritization of tasks and what tasks should be happening and who's closest to make that task happen? I mean, does it take into consideration to try and not create congestion in an area at the same time as well?
Yes, so it does, like wayfinding as well. So you still get the task, but it will then advise the drivers to avoid certain congested areas.
Okay.
And that's based on so many drivers per aisle or per access route, So you may have a rule that says, if there's 3 drivers in a route, reroute or give a warning to the driver that this is a full area, and to take an alternative route to get to the warehouse or whatever you may take place. So we're still in the early stages there. And the challenge around, giving Ted specific instructions is that Ted becomes, somewhat one-dimensional, in that's the rule he follows irrespective. So you have to be almost careful what you wish for. So what I try to encourage our customers to do is just to create simple rules, like a little notice. Three drivers in, route A, which is typically the route they would take to the warehouse, and to avoid it. And we don't force them not to take it. They may still choose to take it, but they'll take another route instead. It's almost like, when you're driving on your GPS in your car, and you see all the red lines along the road. So that's what we're trying to do as well, is let ultimately the driver decide, but we're not going to rigidly try to control them as to how to best travel. Just another thing happened the other day as well, is that, a customer said to them, hey, we're having troubles with these parts that you're making. It's a new part. They're not up to spec. So what they're able to do is also create what we call an inspection task. So prior to the product being put away into the warehouse, we're going to enforce an inspection task to be done and send it out to the auditor, their internal auditor, to review and approve those containers before they're actually put away. So that's a task that we can insert right on top, and it has to be done before the actual put away itself. So again, another flexibility, they were having to do that manually, because that happens spontaneously. The automaker would say, hey, we're having a problem with part 1, 2, 3. Please put a check on it. So they'll do it, and now it's a lot easier to maintain with less drama, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, very interesting, and I definitely love the kind of the flexibility there, and also the ability to do those individual tasks like you were talking about, and not having to rely so much on that tribal knowledge or just the experience of the driver, because I think with this it makes the drivers equal in a sense, you could say, because you don't have like a task where it's like, oh well, this person is a little more experienced, so we'll give it to them, but then every manager is saying that this same person is a little more experienced, so we'll give them our task, and they end up with like the bulk of the workload, and then you're never really getting your other drivers to that next level. So I think like the way that this would work for that driver kind of, I guess, culture and experience growth. I mean, you're disseminating it fairly equally, so you're going to see kind of everybody getting to or being at the same level of completion of the task. So I think that's really interesting as well. And then you also have for the employee side as well, it's more comfortable for them, because they're not feeling like, oh, I'm getting more work put on me because whatever reason, right? And why isn't this person getting more tasks than me? But it sounds like the system is gonna kind of handle that for you, and the prioritization, and really make it make sense for everybody that's involved. And then overall the end goal of the operation and the process, kind of moving everything and working as one unit. So very interesting stuff about TED here, and I'm definitely interested to see how it continues to grow, especially as some of these technologies continue to evolve. We know AI is constantly evolving, right? So I'm sure that'll make the system even more robust as time goes on as well. But I do want to talk a little bit about your book before we wrap up here. I know you have a second edition now, so tell us a little bit about the update and second edition. What can we expect in there? Yeah,
I mean, as you know, the world changed dramatically over a very short period of time, and the book came out in 2019, and then the world really changed a year later, and I said, boy, my book really sounds kind of old now, like it's, and so I came out with the second edition really to speak to some of the challenges warehouses in general were facing due to the things like the pandemic and supply chain disruptions and changes. And if anything, it heightened the awareness of having, at the very least, accurate inventories. But more importantly, where were you in terms of, moving your warehouse forward? Because, two things that became really apparent during the pandemic was, lack of space on the warehouse side and lack of workers. Both became very scarce. So the challenge was, how do you do more with the same amount, or in some instances, fewer people? Because during the pandemic, Amazon went on a hiring binge, and almost a very available warehouse resource went to work in an Amazon warehouse. And Amazon were paying substantially higher than many other companies. So as a result, the book became more relevant and heightened the need for people to improve their processes, but also take a step back and say, where are we going with this warehouse? It's, barcoding and wireless will only take you so far. And so what I reference in the book as well, at least in the second edition, is, Zebra's warehouse maturation process, which you may have seen before, Kevin. It talks about the 5 stages of warehouse growth. And, most companies are lucky to get to stage 3, which is your typical WMS with the barcoding and wireless system. Stages 4 and 5, you're getting into the smart warehouse technologies. Stage 4 is where it's basically creating the task management, and stage 5 is where the system is being proactive. So now you've got an element of AI working to alter tasks, create new tasks, as well as restructure priorities based on what's happening out on the floor itself. So the question now becomes, okay, don't stop at stage 3 where you got your WMS, which is very easy for, most companies to do. In fact, most of our customers are stuck at stage 3, and challenging yourselves to go to stage 4 at the very least and get into the task management, because you won't be able to effectively, bring in robots and AMRs and AGVs without some sort of task automation on your side, because you've got to be able to, the new big buzzwords are synchronize and orchestrate the work of your workers with that of these highly automated pieces of equipment, which, as you know, don't exactly, cost a few dollars. It costs millions of dollars.
Yes.
So if you're going to get the most out of that equipment, you've got to synchronize the work of that equipment with that of the humans, right? And there's also a safety aspect of it as well, is that, these drivers need to be told, and vice versa need to be told, when an AMR or an AGV is in the area, and to basically be aware of that. And that's what this technology can do. So it's all about a more holistic view of the warehouse and the role of humans in the warehouse with this calming automation, and in light of this, all the shortages we're having. Interestingly enough, I'm hearing the opposite now, is that there's too much inventory in people's warehouses.
Yeah.
Everybody's stocked up like crazy.
Yeah.
Right. And now their challenge is, how do they manage that inventory, keep it from going stale? And again, it all comes back to your basic inventory principles of inventory turns and basically making sure that, you know where everything is, so that way you don't end up finding stuff in the inventory account and go, oh, damn, we got to throw this out because, it's stale dated now.
Yeah. Or
whatever. Or be able to have logic in your system that can basically ensure that you're picking certain products, like FIFO before their stale date. But nonetheless, there's a lot more pressure on supply chains and warehouses in particular to become more efficient, just because, there's shortages everywhere still. And as a result of that, you just got to get smarter. That's why I think TED is very relevant for these times.
All right, and very, very interesting stuff, Jeff. And I think it's such a good point. I mean, so much changed in such a short period of time, and I think we're seeing now, and especially recently being in ProMat, just all the technology and solutions that are coming into play to be able to help supply chains and warehouses operate in a smarter way, including TED. I think is a really interesting thing, and I think it's a great thing for the industry as well. It's pushing us forward to be better and to be smarter, as you said. So really interesting stuff, and definitely recommend checking out the book. Your Warehouse is Not Your Fridge. Great read, easy read too, I will say, which is a good good thing always for those that are very busy in the warehousing space. So, Jeff, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast again with me and talking about TED and your book and just the smart warehouse in general. If people are interested in learning more about portable intelligence and TED, how can they do that?
Well, you can just go to our website. It's portable-intelligence.com, and you'll find it under our solutions. And that's the easiest way to do it. And my book is also available on Amazon.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well. So, Jeff, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.